The farmhouse stood at the edge of the cornfields like it had been forgotten on purpose. People in Black Hollow County, Iowa, avoided it without ever saying why. It wasn't cursed, they'd say. It wasn't haunted either. It just wasn't right. The land belonged to Elias Granger, a quiet man in his late 50s with deep-set eyes and hands permanently cracked from work. He lived there with his wife Miriam, their adult daughter Lydia, Lydia's young son Caleb, and the recently hired farmhand Noah Pike. 5 people, one farmhouse, miles from the nearest neighbor. And yet, for weeks, Elias had felt like there were 6. It began with the snow. One morning in late February, Elias opened the front door before dawn and froze. Footprints. They came from the tree line behind the barn, crossed the frozen field, and stopped directly in front of the farmhouse door. No prints led away. They didn't circle. They didn't turn back. They simply ended. Elias stood there long enough for the cold to bite through his coat. He knelt, touched the edges of the prints. They were fresh, deep, heavy. Someone had stood there, listening. He didn't tell Miriam. He didn't tell Lydia. Some things felt safer when they stayed unspoken. That night, Elias heard the attic. It was subtle at first, a soft dragging sound, wood scraping against wood. He lay awake, counting Miriam's breaths beside him, telling himself it was rats. Old houses had rats. Then came the footsteps. Slow, measured, not scurrying, not random. Human. Elias sat up. The attic access hatch was nailed shut years ago after a storm cracked the beam. No one had been up there since. Yet the footsteps crossed from one end of the house to the other, then stopped, right above his bedroom. The sound didn't move again. It waited. Noah Pike arrived 2 weeks earlier, answering a handwritten notice posted outside the feed store. He was young, early 20s, with a face that never quite settled into an expression. Always watching, always listening. On his 3rd day, Noah asked Elias something strange. "Who used to live here before you?" Elias paused mid-step. "No one. My family built this place." Noah nodded slowly. "Just checking." Later that afternoon, Noah mentioned the attic. "You ever notice it gets colder up there than it should?" he asked casually. Elias stared at him. "You've been up there?" Noah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, just feels like it, doesn't it?" That night, the attic footsteps returned. This time, they moved faster. Lydia Granger had stopped sleeping weeks ago. Every night, when the house fell quiet, she heard someone whispering her name from the hallway. Not calling, not pleading, knowing. She never opened her door. She pressed her ear to it instead, listening as the voice drifted from room to room. Sometimes it laughed. Sometimes it cried. Once she heard it whisper, "He's watching the boy." That was the night she locked Caleb's bedroom door from the outside. She didn't tell her parents. She started hiding kitchen knives beneath her mattress. The barn was older than the house. No one remembered who built it. Elias avoided it after sunset. The animals did too. The cows refused to enter their stalls at night, pulling against their leads until their eyes rolled white. One evening, Elias followed a sound into the barn. Footsteps. He saw them clearly in the dust, fresh prints circling the hayloft ladder. They went up. They did not come down. Elias climbed 3 rungs before the smell hit him. Rot. Not animal. Human. He backed away slowly. That night, Noah didn't return from the barn. 3 days later, the mail piled up. The Granger family missed church. The sheriff, Thomas Reed, arrived just before noon. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was spotless. Too spotless. The bodies were found one by one. Elias and Miriam, laid side by side in the barn, eyes open, faces calm. Lydia, at the bottom of the cellar stairs, hands clenched like she'd tried to hold on to something that wasn't there. Caleb, still in his bed, tucked in carefully, as if someone had wanted him to sleep through it. Noah Pike was never found. There were no signs of struggle, no blood outside the bodies, no weapon recovered. But the footprints, they led from the forest to the house, to the barn, to the cellar, and then they stopped. Before sealing the property, Sheriff Reed climbed into the attic. He found food wrappers, old clothing, a mattress pressed flat from use. Someone had been living there for months. Scratched into the wooden beam above the bedroom was a single sentence. I watched them until they stopped moving. No fingerprints, no DNA. The case was closed as unsolved. Years later, the farmhouse was demolished. The land was sold, but locals still report footprints in fresh snow, leading nowhere. And sometimes, late at night, if the wind is right, you can hear footsteps crossing a ceiling that no longer exists, waiting. The official report states no suspect was ever identified, but Sheriff Reed wrote one final note in his personal journal. Whatever lived with them never left. The farmhouse sat where the road ended, not because the road couldn't continue, but because it chose not to. Anyone driving past Morrow Creek Road felt it, a tightening in the chest, the sudden urge to check the rearview mirror, the thought that something behind them had just shifted its weight. The house belonged to Calvin Rook, a widower in his early 40s, who moved there with his daughter Elena after inheriting the property from a distant uncle he barely remembered. The real estate agent had smiled too quickly when handing over the keys. "Been empty a while," she'd said, "but solid bones. Old farms like this, they last." Calvin didn't ask how long a while was. He should have. The first night, the house breathed. Calvin lay awake on the living room couch, listening to wood expand and contract, telling himself every old house made noises. Then the footsteps started. Not above him, not below, inside the walls. Slow, careful, like someone learning the layout. Elena slept through it. She always slept deeply, thumb pressed against her cheek the way she had since she was a toddler. Calvin didn't wake her. He told himself the sounds stopped eventually. They didn't. They just moved farther away. The barn stood 50 yards behind the house, its doors hanging unevenly, its shadow longer than it should have been. Calvin found it strange that the barn had 3 interior doors. One to the tool room, one to the hay storage, one that led nowhere, just a blank wall behind it. The door opened anyway. Behind it was darkness that didn't feel like empty space. It felt occupied. Calvin shut it and told himself it was his imagination. That night, he dreamed of doors opening on their own. Elena spoke at breakfast. "Daddy," she said, stirring cereal she wasn't eating. The man was in the hallway again. Calvin froze. "What man?" She shrugged. "The one who smells like dirt." Cold crawled up Calvin's spine. "What does he do?" Elena thought for a moment. "He counts the doors." There was no rain, no mud, no snow. Yet Calvin found footprints circling the house. Bare feet, large, heavy. They stopped beneath Elena's bedroom window. They didn't approach the front door. They didn't leave. They simply ended. Calvin scrubbed the dirt away with a shovel until his hands blistered. The earth beneath was packed hard, undisturbed. The nearest neighbor, Walter Hensley, lived nearly a mile away. He stopped by once, standing at the edge of the driveway instead of approaching the porch. "You shouldn't stay past harvest," Walter said. Calvin laughed nervously. "Why's that?" Walter didn't laugh back. This land remembers people. Before Calvin could ask what that meant, Walter turned around and left. The attic hatch wasn't visible at first. It revealed itself one night when Calvin heard breathing above him. Slow, wet, patient. He climbed the ladder with a flashlight, heart pounding. The attic was empty. No boxes, no insulation piles. Just floorboards worn smooth in the center. As if someone had been kneeling there for a long time. Calvin noticed scratches on the rafters. Tallies. Hundreds of them, grouped by days. A local teenager, Miles Caro, agreed to help with repairs. He lasted 2 days. On the third morning, Miles refused to enter the barn. "There's someone living in there," he whispered. Calvin told him no one was. Miles shook his head violently. "No, something's staying." Miles never came back. That night, the barn doors opened on their own. The cellar door was bolted shut. It hadn't been opened in years. Elena found it open one evening. She stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness. "He doesn't like when it's closed," she said. Calvin slammed the door shut. The pounding from below started immediately. The smell came first. Damp earth, rotting wood, something older. Calvin found dirt tracked across the kitchen floor every morning, always leading toward Elena's room, never away from it. He started sleeping in front of her door. The footsteps stopped passing through the hallway. They waited on the other side. Calvin pulled up a loose plank in the barn. Beneath it was packed soil, and beneath that, fabric, a sleeve, then a hand. He stopped digging when he realized there were many layers, each wrapped carefully, each buried shallow, none with names. Elena began whispering at night. Calvin heard her responding to questions no one asked. "He says you're standing where he stood," she murmured. "He says the house doesn't like forgetting." Calvin packed their bags that night. The car wouldn't start. The barn doors slammed shut. The house went quiet. Too quiet. Calvin saw him for the first time just before dawn. A man-shaped figure standing at the end of the hallway. Skin dark with soil. Eyes hollow. Mouth moving silently. He pointed toward the cellar and smiled. Calvin descended the cellar stairs. The walls were lined with names, scratched deep. Generations of them. Farmers, wives, children, each crossed out. At the center of the cellar was a single chair, facing the stairs. Waiting. Calvin understood then. The land didn't kill. It kept. The farmhouse was found abandoned weeks later. The car was still in the driveway. Elena's shoes were by the door. No signs of struggle. No bodies. Just footprints circling the house. Bare feet. Leading nowhere. The farmhouse stands empty again. People swear they see lights in the attic. Children say a man counts doors at night. And if you stop your car at the end of Morrow Creek Road, you'll feel it. The land listening, waiting to remember you. When my uncle died, he left me something I didn't expect. Not money, not land in the city. He left me his farmhouse. It sat alone in the northern part of Iowa, surrounded by miles of cornfields that whispered constantly in the wind. The nearest neighbor was almost 3 miles away. I hadn't visited the place since I was 12, but I remembered 2 things clearly: the smell of damp wood and the rule: never go into the lower barn after sunset. He never explained why. I didn't believe in rural superstitions anymore. I was 28, broke, and desperate for a fresh start. So I packed my car and drove 12 hours to claim what was legally mine. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint had peeled into long, curling strips, and the porch sagged slightly on one side. The barn stood behind it, tall and crooked, like it had leaned too long against the wind. And then there was the lower barn. It wasn't attached to the main structure. It stood beyond the field, near a tree line, half sunken into the earth. I remembered that too. I moved in that same day. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. No traffic, no distant sirens, just wind moving through corn and the creaking of old wood adjusting to temperature changes. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first. Then I saw it. Through my bedroom window, across the dark field. A red light. It was faint, steady, not blinking. And it was coming from the lower barn. I sat up, staring. Maybe a trespasser,
teenagers, hunters. I told myself I'd check it in the morning. The red light stayed on until dawn. The next morning, I walked to the lower barn. Up close, it looked worse than I remembered. The wooden planks were warped and gray.
Rusted chains hung from the doors. The ground around it felt uneven, like something beneath the soil had shifted. The doors were locked with a heavy iron padlock. I walked around the back. No windows, no openings, no sign of power lines either. There was no electricity connected to this structure. So what was that red light? That night I stayed awake. At 2:17 a.m. exactly, the red light turned on again. Same intensity, same place. This time, I grabbed a flashlight. I told myself it was stupid to be scared of light. The field felt longer at night. The corn brushed against my arms as I walked. The wind had stopped. The air was thick and unmoving. As I approached the barn, I noticed something strange. The padlock was gone. The doors were slightly open, just enough for someone to slip inside. I froze. I knew I hadn't touched that lock. I stepped forward and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Metallic, like rust or old blood. The inside of the barn was darker than it should have been. My flashlight beam felt swallowed. Dust floated heavily in the air. And then I saw it. At the far end of the barn, a lantern, glowing red, sitting on the dirt floor. There were no footprints around it. I stepped closer. The lantern wasn't plugged into anything. It wasn't battery-powered either. It looked ancient, oil-based. But it made no sound, no flame flicker, just a steady red glow. Then my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, and died. The barn went completely black, except for the red light. That's when I heard it, breathing, behind me, slow, wet, close to my ear. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The breathing stopped. Then something whispered, "You came back." The voice sounded like it was coming from underground. I ran. I don't remember reaching the house. I just remember slamming the door and locking every window. When I checked the time, 2:29 a.m., the red light was gone. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been stress, lack of sleep, imagination. But when I walked back to the lower barn, the padlock was back, locked, untouched. I drove into town and asked around. Most people avoided eye contact when I mentioned the lower barn. Finally, an old man at the diner spoke. "You're Rowan's nephew, right?" I nodded. He sighed. "You should sell that place." "Why?" He stared into his coffee before answering. "Back in 1978, your uncle reported livestock disappearing. Said something was digging under the lower barn. Sheriff checked it out. And? Sheriff never came back out. The report said he fell through rotten flooring and broke his neck. But people said they heard screaming for almost 10 minutes. From underground. I didn't sleep that night. At 2:17 a.m., the red light returned. But this time, it wasn't just in the barn. It was under my window. Close. Much closer than before. I pulled the curtain slightly aside and saw it. The lantern, sitting in the middle of my yard. I could see the outline of something standing behind it. Tall. Too tall. Its head nearly reached the lower branches of the oak tree. It wasn't moving, just standing, watching. I locked myself in the bathroom and waited for sunrise. When morning came, the yard was empty. But the ground beneath the oak tree had been disturbed, like something heavy had stood there for a long time. That afternoon, I did something I should have done immediately. I broke the lock. The lower barn doors swung open easily. Inside, the red lantern was gone, but the dirt floor had changed. In the center, the ground had caved in slightly. There was a hole now, about 4 feet wide. Darkness below. I aimed a new flashlight into it. Wooden steps, leading down. I hesitated. Then I went down. The temperature dropped immediately. The smell was stronger down there.
Metallic, rotting. The basement was larger than the barn above it. And the walls, they weren't wood. They were packed earth. Claw marks covered them, deep.
Long, not animal. Too deliberate. And then I saw them. Names, carved into the dirt walls. Dozens of them. Some scratched with fingernails. Some etched with tools. One of them, Ethan Rowan, my uncle. Below it, a date. 3 years ago. That was the year he stopped answering my calls. My chest tightened. At the center of the underground room, the red lantern. Waiting. I didn't hear it approach this time. I felt it. The ground trembled slightly. The dirt walls shifted. Something massive moved behind them, circling. I ran toward the stairs, but they were gone. Just a dirt wall where the exit should have been. The lantern flickered for the first time, and the whisper returned. You stayed too long. The walls began closing in, not collapsing, moving, like something alive was pushing the earth inward. I clawed at the dirt where the stairs had been. My fingers bled. The lantern's light grew brighter. And then, I saw it. Its shape pressed against the dirt wall. A face, but wrong. Eyes too far apart. Mouth too wide. It smiled. The earth cracked open in front of me, and a hand pushed through. Not flesh, not bone. Something like packed soil shaped like fingers. Reaching. I don't know how I escaped. The next thing I remember is waking up outside the barn at sunrise. The hole was gone. The floor was solid dirt again. No stairs. No basement. No lantern. Just silence. I tried to leave. I packed my car and started driving down the gravel road. After 10 minutes, I passed the farmhouse again. I drove the opposite direction. 10 minutes later, the farmhouse again. No matter which way I drove, the road looped back. Like the land didn't want me to leave. That night, at 2:17 a.m., I didn't wait for the red light. I saw it through the front door. Inside the house, moving slowly down the hallway toward my bedroom, I heard the whisper clearly now. You belong here. The bedroom door handle began turning. Slowly, calmly. Like whoever was outside knew I had nowhere else to go. I don't think the farmhouse was inherited. I think it was passed down, like a responsibility, or a feeding ground. If someone finds this, if you ever see a red lantern glowing in an empty field, do not follow it. And whatever you do, never stay past 2:17 a.m. Because once it says you came back, it won't let you leave again.